3 minutes. Just 3 minutes of silence in that boardroom erased a 44 million deal. No shouting, no table pounding, just the cold stillness of a CFO. Enough to unravel an entire performance of manufactured confidence. And I, relegated to the role of slide clicker, witnessed from the shadows as everything began to crumble. Slowly but irreversibly. This wasn't just a fall. It was a revenge symphony played with patience and precision, each note calculated to perfection. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've spent 12 years building data strategies that turned struggling companies into market leaders. Until that Tuesday morning in March, I'd never been publicly humiliated in my career, not once, not until Ethan Cole walked into our lives like a hurricane in an Armani suit, armed with an MBA from Wharton and the emotional intelligence of a sledgehammer. The conference room on the 42nd floor had witnessed my finest moments, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan's skyline, the kind of view that reminded you why you sacrifice sleep and sanity for this job. I'd presented to Fortune 500 CEOs in that room, secured 8-figure contracts, earned standing ovations from boards of directors who usually showed as much emotion as marble statues. That morning, 23 people gathered around the mahogany table for what should have been my crowning achievement, the Orion Dynamics strategic overhaul. 18 months of research condensed into a blueprint that would revolutionize their market position. I'd arrived at 6 a.m. to triple-check everything. The deck was perfect, 97 slides of meticulously crafted insights, each data point verified 3 times, every projection backed by algorithms I'd personally developed. My team had worked weekends for 2 months straight. We'd interviewed 347 stakeholders, analyzed 5 years of market data, built predictive models that our competitors would kill for. Ethan Cole arrived at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the meeting. Trailing cologne and confidence, our new CMO, hired just 3 weeks prior, a game changer, according to our CEO, brought in to inject fresh thinking. He glanced at my presentation for exactly 45 seconds, I counted, before his face twisted into something between amusement and disdain. "Sarah, this is thorough," he said, "the way you describe a child's finger painting. But it lacks vision, too many words, not enough inspiration. The client needs to feel something, not drown in spreadsheets." The room went silent. My senior analyst, James, stopped mid-sip of his coffee. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. "This is a data strategy presentation," I said carefully. "Orion specifically requested." "I know what they requested," Ethan interrupted, already pulling out his laptop. "But I know what they need. I've worked with 3 of their board members at my previous firm. Trust me, they want transformation, not information." He turned to the room, that practiced smile spreading across his face like oil on water. "Sarah, you'll assist me today. Can you handle the slide transitions while I present? I'll need you to keep pace, I move fast." Handle the slide transitions. 12 years of expertise reduced to clicking a button. I felt the heat rise from my chest to my face, my fingers curling involuntarily around my pen, around the table. My team exchanged glances, shock, sympathy, and something else. Fear. If he could do this to me, what did it mean for them? "Of course," I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the hurricane in my chest. "Whatever's best for the client." Ethan spent the next 10 minutes butchering my work, replacing complex analytics with buzzwords, swapping substantive strategy for what he called visual storytelling, synergy, disruption, paradigm shifts. He deleted entire sections on risk mitigation, replaced financial projections with stock photos of people climbing mountains. He actually used a sunset metaphor for market expansion. By 9:30 a.m., my masterpiece had become a TED Talk written by an AI that had only been fed LinkedIn motivational posts. "Much better," he announced, closing his laptop with satisfaction. "This will actually move them. Sarah, make sure you're on slide 1 when we enter. First impressions matter." As the Orion team began filing in, I took my position at the side of the room, laptop in hand, relegated to the shadows. Laura Price entered last, the CFO whose reputation preceded her like thunder. She'd transformed Orion from a regional player to a global force, and she did it by never suffering fools. Her eyes found mine across the room, a brief flicker of recognition, We'd worked together years ago, before she'd ascended to the C-suite. She'd taught me that data without context was just noise, but she'd also taught me something else: patience was a weapon most people never learn to wield. I smiled at her, professional and pleasant. Then I took my seat in the corner, finger poised over the spacebar, ready to play my part. The slide clicker, the assistant, the woman who knew exactly what was about to happen, and exactly how much silence it would take to destroy everything Ethan Cole thought he'd built. The show was about to begin, and I had the best seat in the house. The elevator down felt like descending into a different life, one where I wasn't Sarah Mitchell, senior strategist, but some invisible assistant whose name no one would remember by lunch. My phone vibrated as I hit the lobby. James, asking if I was okay, then another from Maya, my junior analyst. What the hell just happened? I didn't respond to either. I had a different message to send. Laura Price and I had history that Ethan couldn't have known about. 6 years ago, before she became Orion's CFO. She'd been a client at my previous firm. I was young, eager, assigned to support her division's digital transformation. During a critical presentation, the lead consultant had frozen, completely blanked on our core recommendations. Laura watched him flounder for 30 seconds before turning to me. "You built this model. You present it." I did, flawlessly. Afterwards, she pulled me aside. "Information only has value when it's delivered, so others truly understand it," she'd said. "But sometimes, Sarah, the most powerful message is what you don't say. Silence forces people to fill the void, and what they fill it with tells you everything." We'd stayed in touch. Occasional coffee when our paths crossed, holiday cards with handwritten notes. She'd watched my career ascend, celebrated my wins from afar. She knew my work, my standards, my worth, and she'd know immediately if something was off. I found a quiet corner in the building's atrium cafe, pulled out my phone, and crafted the message carefully. Not enough to violate any professional boundaries, but enough to plant a seed. "Laura, quick heads up. I wasn't able to review today's final presentation content. Ethan made significant last-minute changes. Be prepared for some gaps in the analytical foundation, best, S. Vague enough to avoid accusations of sabotage, specific enough to trigger her instincts. I hit send and ordered a black coffee I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands while I waited. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Understood. Thank you for the notice." That was all, but from Laura, it was everything. She'd once told me that in finance, the most dangerous presentations weren't the obviously bad ones; those got killed quickly. It was the mediocre ones dressed up as excellence that destroyed value. They passed initial scrutiny, got implementation budget, then failed spectacularly when reality hit. She'd built her reputation on spotting them early, killing them quietly, and saving companies from themselves. I walked back to our floor slowly, using the stairs instead of the elevator, burning off the adrenaline. In my mind, I could see it playing out upstairs. Ethan, all gesture and no substance, painting pictures with words that meant nothing. The Orion team, initially impressed by the energy, the confidence, the show, and Laura, silent in her corner seat, letting him run, giving him all the rope he needed. By the time I reached my desk, the meeting would be starting. Ethan would be hitting his stride. Those practiced gestures, that calculated passion. He'd mistake Laura's silence for approval, her note-taking for interest. He wouldn't know she never took notes during presentations. She had perfect recall. Those notes were something else entirely. Calculations, inconsistencies, questions that would never need to be asked because the answers were already obvious. I pulled up my original presentation on my desktop, the real one, with all its unsexy data and careful projections. Every slide Ethan had deleted, I saved to a separate folder. Every chart he'd simplified into meaninglessness, I archived with its full context. Not for revenge, not yet, but for preservation. Because when you're playing a long game, evidence isn't a weapon, it's insurance. My email dinged. James again. Meeting started. Ethan's really going for it. Laura hasn't said a word. Of course she hadn't. Laura Price didn't interrupt performances. She let them finish. Let the performer take their bow. Let them think they'd won the room. Then she'd ask one question. maybe two. Surgical strikes that exposed every weakness, every gap, every place where confidence had substituted for competence. I opened a new spreadsheet, started working on next quarter's pipeline analysis. Ordinary work, invisible work, the kind that actually kept companies running while people like Ethan took credit for the sunshine. But I wasn't really seeing the numbers. I was seeing Laura's face, that slight tilt of her head when she was about to dismantle someone who'd mistaken her silence for weakness. The beautiful thing about data is that it doesn't lie. It can be misrepresented, cherry-picked, dressed up, or dumbed down. But the truth lives in the numbers, waiting. Ethan had stripped away every piece of substantive analysis from my deck, replaced facts with feelings, projections with promises. He'd removed the foundation and built a house of cards on empty air. All Laura had to do was blow. The Orion Dynamics boardroom was a study in calculated intimidation. Black granite table that could seat 30, walls lined with awards and acquisitions. A subtle display of power that whispered rather than shouted. I'd been in that room exactly twice before, both times presenting alongside senior partners. Now I sat in the corner with my laptop, invisible as furniture, watching Ethan command the space like he'd built it himself. He was good. I had to give him that. The way he moved, using the full width of the room, making eye contact with each executive in turn. His voice rose and fell with practiced rhythm, painting visions of market dominance and revolutionary transformation. The opening slides my data butchered into his poetry flowed across the screen in perfect time with his gestures. Imagine, he said, hands spread wide, Orion Dynamics not just competing, but defining the very nature of competition, not just entering markets, but creating them. Several heads nodded. The VP of Marketing was actually leaning forward, enchanted. Even the CEO, Marcus Webb, known for his skepticism, seemed engaged. But Laura Price sat perfectly still, her Mont Blanc pen resting on a leather portfolio, unopened. She hadn't written a single word. 20 minutes in, Ethan hit the section where I'd originally outlined supply chain vulnerabilities, critical weaknesses that needed immediate attention. He'd replaced it with a single slide, a photo of an eagle soaring over mountains. Like this eagle, he said, without a trace of irony. Orion will rise above traditional limitations. I clicked to the next slide, maintaining my poker face, but inside I was documenting every moment. Laura's eyes flicked to mine for a fraction of a second. Nothing more than acknowledgement that she'd seen me see her seeing everything. 30 minutes in. Ethan reached the financial projections, or what was left of them. My 40-slide quantitative analysis had become 5 slides of hockey stick growth curves with no underlying assumptions, no risk factors, no sensitivity analysis, just numbers climbing toward the sky like Jack's beanstalk. We project 300% ROI within 18 months, Ethan announced, the number hanging in the air like a challenge. That's when Laura spoke for the first time. Based on what data? Not hostile, not even skeptical, just curious, the way you'd ask about the weather. But the room's temperature changed. Marcus Webb straightened in his chair. The VP of Operations, who'd been checking his phone, looked up. Ethan didn't miss a beat. Based on comprehensive market analysis and emerging sector opportunities, the full methodology is extensive. We didn't want to bog down today's strategic discussion with granular details. I see, Laura said. And this comprehensive analysis Sarah led that work. Every eye in the room turned to me. I stayed silent, hands steady on my keyboard, letting the question hang. Sarah provided valuable input, Ethan said, his smile tightening. But this strategic vision represents a collaborative evolution of the initial research. Evolution, Laura repeated the word like she was tasting wine, finding it wanting. Please, continue. Ethan resumed. But the spell was broken. Where before his confidence had seemed commanding, now it felt compensatory. His gestures, previously smooth, carried a slight urgency. He was speeding up, trying to recapture momentum, not realizing that momentum without foundation just meant falling faster. He reached the risk mitigation section, which no longer existed. In my original, I'd identified 17 critical risk factors with detailed contingency plans. Ethan had replaced it with a single slide titled Embracing Opportunity, featuring a sunrise. Risk, he said, is simply opportunity viewed through the lens of fear. The VP of Operations actually snorted. Marcus Webb's expression had shifted from engaged to examining, like a scientist studying a specimen that wasn't quite what he'd expected. Laura made her second comment. In my experience, risk ignored is opportunity for competitors. But please, tell us about implementation timelines. There were no implementation timelines. I'd built a detailed 18-month rollout with dependencies, milestones, and resource allocations. Ethan had condensed it to a single slide with 4 bullet points: assess, act, achieve, accelerate. We believe in agile implementation, he said, the first hint of sweat appearing at his temple. Fixed timelines can constrain innovative thinking. Innovative thinking, Laura echoed. She finally opened her portfolio, wrote something down, then another note, then another. The scratching of her pen was the loudest sound in the room. Ethan rushed through the last 10 slides, his rhythm broken, his poetry turning to prose. The conclusion, which should have been a careful summary of recommendations with clear next steps, became a desperate crescendo of buzzwords. Synergy, disruption, transformation, paradigm shift, revolutionary, game-changing. When he finished, the room was silent. Not the anticipatory silence of people preparing to applaud, but the awkward silence of people trying to figure out what they'd just witnessed. "Thank you, Ethan," Marcus Webb said finally. "That was energetic." Energetic, in executive speak, that was barely one step above interesting, which itself was corporate code for what the hell was that? Laura closed her portfolio with a soft snap that somehow echoed like thunder. "I have some questions about the underlying data. Sarah, since you led the initial research, perhaps you could—" "Sarah was primarily in a support role," Ethan interrupted, the first real crack in his composure. Laura's smile was so slight you'd need a microscope to measure it. "I see. Then perhaps, Ethan, you can walk us through the quantitative foundation for that 300% ROI projection. Specifically?" The trap had been set from the moment he'd opened his mouth. Now it was closing, tooth by tooth, and there was nowhere to run. "Specifically," Ethan repeated, his Adam's apple bobbing in a swallow that was audible 3 seats away. "Well, the 300% projection is based on capturing emerging market segments while optimizing operational efficiency through digital transformations and—" Laura raised one finger, just one. Ethan stopped mid-sentence like she'd hit a pause button. "Let me rephrase," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet that preceded avalanches. "What is your customer acquisition cost? What's the lifetime value calculation? What discount rate did you apply to future cash flows? Which comparable companies did you benchmark against? What are your base, bear, and bull case scenarios?" Each question landed like a precisely placed nail. Ethan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He glanced at his laptop, then at me. A flash of something desperate in his eyes. Did he expect me to save him? The woman he'd reduced to a slide clicker. "Those granular details," he started, "are not granular." Laura cut him off. "They're fundamental. Any first-year analyst at Orion could answer them. You're asking us to commit significant resources based on a 300% ROI projection. Surely you can explain how you arrived at that number." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum that seemed to pull the oxygen from the room. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his $60,000 presentation reduced to worthlessness by 5 basic questions he couldn't answer. The other executives watched like spectators at an execution, fascinated and horrified in equal measure. Then Laura did something I'd never seen before. She set down her pen, folded her hands, and simply waited. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30. Ethan shifted his weight. "The methodology." Laura said nothing. "We used advanced predictive modeling." Still nothing. "Market conditions are favorable for aggressive growth." Silence. 1 minute, the VP of marketing was staring at the table. The head of product development was studying the ceiling tiles. Marcus Webb sat back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Laura watch Ethan dissolve. 2 minutes. Ethan had stopped trying to speak. Sweat was now visible on his forehead, his collar, his hands, which had conducted symphonies of corporate nonsense just minutes before, hung useless at his sides. The confident CMO who'd strutted in like he owned the place was crumbling in real time. Undone not by attack, but by absence. Not by words, but by their withdrawal. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Someone's phone vibrated against the table. No one moved to check it. 2 minutes, 45 seconds. Ethan opened his mouth one more time, and what came out was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said all morning. I don't have those specific numbers available right now. 3 minutes. Laura nodded once, as if he'd finally given the correct answer to a test he didn't know he was taking. She picked up her pen again, made a single note, then looked at Marcus Webb. Marcus, I believe we need to reassess this proposal. The strategic vision is ambitious, but without quantitative foundation. I can't recommend proceeding. Perhaps we should reconvene when the full analytical framework is available. It was corporate execution, swift and clean. No raised voices, no accusations, no drama. Just 3 minutes of silence that stripped away every layer of Ethan's carefully constructed facade, leaving him naked in a room full of people who would never take him seriously again. Marcus Webb nodded slowly. I agree. Ethan, Sarah, thank you for your time. We'll be in touch about next steps. The dismissal was clear. I closed my laptop, stood, and walked toward the door, passing Ethan on my way. He was still standing at the head of the table, looking like he wasn't quite sure what had happened, like a boxer who'd been knocked out but was still on his feet. As I reached for the door handle, Laura spoke one more time. Sarah, do you have a moment I'd like to discuss some of the original research you mentioned? I turned back, met her eyes. Of course, I have comprehensive documentation of all the analytical work. I thought you might, she said, and this time her smile was visible to everyone. Ethan finally moved then, gathering his things with mechanical movements, his face the color of spoiled milk. He left without another word, brushing past me like I was furniture, but I wasn't furniture anymore. I was the person with the data, the foundation, the answers to questions that should never have needed asking. The other executives filed out, some nodding to me recognition I hadn't received in the 3 weeks since Ethan's arrival. Marcus Webb paused at the door. Sarah, I look forward to seeing your original analysis. When the room emptied except for Laura and me, she stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below. 3 minutes, she said, not turning around. Most people can't handle 30 seconds of silence, but 3 minutes, that's when the truth has nowhere left to hide. She turned to face me then, and her expression was something between approval and conspiracy. I believe we should have lunch tomorrow, Le Bernardin, 1 o'clock. We have much to discuss about your future. It wasn't a question. Laura Price didn't ask questions she already knew the answers to. And as I left that boardroom, I realized the 3 minutes of silence hadn't been her weapon, it had been mine. She'd just been the one to fire it. Le Bernardin at 1 o'clock meant something in Manhattan. It meant you mattered enough for someone to spend $400 on lunch and 3 hours in the middle of a workday. It meant the conversation was too important for conference rooms and corporate coffee. It meant an offer was coming. Laura was already seated when I arrived, in a corner booth that somehow felt removed from the rest of the restaurant, despite being in plain sight. She was reading something on her phone, but looked up before I'd even reached the table, that supernatural awareness that separated executives who survived from those who merely succeeded. Sarah, thank you for coming. We ordered, she didn't even glance at the menu. I followed her lead with the tasting course, and then she set her phone face down on the table. In the corporate world, that gesture was the equivalent of a samurai laying down his sword. Let me be direct, she said, which in my experience meant she was about to be anything but. Yesterday's presentation was a disaster. Marcus is furious. The board is asking questions, and Ethan Cole is finished, though he doesn't know it yet. I kept my expression neutral, professional, though inside something dark and satisfied was purring. But that's not why we're here, Laura continued. We're here because I've been watching you for 6 years. Sarah, your work, your growth, your potential, and frankly, your waste. My waste. You're brilliant at what you do. Your analysis is impeccable. Your insight's genuine. Your strategic thinking years ahead of your peers. And you're sitting in a consultancy letting people like Ethan Cole take credit for your intelligence while you click through PowerPoints. The waiter appeared with amuse-bouches, Tiny, perfect creations that probably cost more than most people's entire lunch. Laura waited until he left. Orion Dynamics needs a new executive vice president of strategic intelligence. It's a position I'm creating specifically for someone with your skill set. Direct report to me, initially, then to Marcus once you're established. 450,000 base, equivalent equity package. Performance bonuses that could double that. Full team building authority. Hire who you want, fire who you don't. I set down my fork carefully, buying time to process. It was 3 times my current salary, a title that would leapfrog 5 career levels, the kind of offer that didn't come twice. That's generous, I said. It's strategic, Laura corrected. We're about to enter the most critical 18 months in Orion's history. 3 acquisitions in play, digital transformation across all divisions, expansion into Asian markets. I need someone who understands that data isn't just numbers, it's the DNA of decision-making. Someone who can see patterns others miss, who can build models that actually predict, rather than just project. She paused, took a sip of wine. And I need someone who understands that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming so successful they have to watch your ascent from below. There it was, the real conversation beneath the offer. You know about my situation, I said, not a question. I know Ethan Cole is a symptom of a larger problem at your firm. I know they've hired 3 external transformation leaders in the past year, all of whom have pushed out talented people to make room for their own networks. I know your CEO values style over substance, and your board is too disconnected to notice the talent drain. She leaned forward slightly. And I know you have a list of people you'd bring with you if you could. I thought of James. Brilliant, but overlooked because he didn't play politics. Maya, whose quantitative skills were wasted on PowerPoint formatting. David from engineering, who'd built 3 proprietary tools the company used daily, but never promoted him for. All of them trapped in the same gilded cage, their potential slowly suffocating under layers of corporate bureaucracy and executive ego. Hypothetically, I said, if someone were to accept such an offer, there might be a few colleagues who would be interested in new opportunities. Laura smiled. Hypothetically, Orion would need to build an entire strategic intelligence division from scratch. We'd need analysts, data engineers, visualization specialists, probably 8 to 10 positions immediately, more within 6 months. That would be quite a talent acquisition. Or liberation, depending on your perspective. The main course arrived black bass with caviar, architectural in its presentation. We ate in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that only exists between people who understand each other's game. There is one condition, Laura said eventually. Your departure needs to be quiet. No grand exit, no bridge burning, no warnings to management. Simply submit your resignation, serve your notice period professionally, and leave. What happens after who chooses to follow? What decisions they make independently that's beyond anyone's control? And Ethan Cole is already dead in the water. Yesterday's performance guaranteed that. Marcus wants to fire him immediately. But I've counseled patience. Let him twist for a few weeks, try to salvage his reputation, fail publicly a few more times. When he's finally terminated, it won't be a surprise to anyone. It will be inevitable. She paused, studying me. But his downfall can't be your focus. Your focus needs to be building something exceptional at Orion. Success is the only revenge worth pursuing. I thought about the 3 minutes of silence in that boardroom. The way Ethan had crumbled under the weight of nothing more than patience and quiet observation. Laura was offering me the chance to do something similar, but on a massive scale to build the kind of division, the kind of career, the kind of success that would make my current company realize exactly what they'd lost. When would you need an answer? I asked. Monday, but Sarah, she reached into her portfolio, pulled out a single sheet of paper, slid it across the table. This might help you decide. It was an email, printed out, from Marcus Webb to Laura, dated that morning. Whatever it takes to get Sarah Mitchell, if yesterday proved anything, it's that we need people who understand the difference between performance and performance art. Full authority to make this happen. Welcome to Orion Dynamics, Laura said, raising her glass before I'd even said yes, because we both knew I would. The moment Ethan had relegated me to clicking slides. The moment he'd dismissed 12 years of expertise with a wave of his manicured hand, this outcome had become inevitable. I raised my own glass, met her eyes. To strategic intelligence. And to patience, she added, the most underestimated weapon in corporate warfare. Monday morning. I submitted my resignation with the kind of understated professionalism that makes HR nervous. 2 weeks' notice, a brief letter thanking the firm for opportunities to grow, offering to ensure smooth transition of my projects, no drama, no accusations, no hint of where I was going, just Sarah Mitchell, 12-year veteran, quietly stepping away. The HR director, Patricia, actually looked confused. Is everything all right? Is there anything we can do to change your mind? Compensation, responsibilities, reporting structure. I've simply decided it's time for a new challenge, I said. The corporate equivalent of, it's not you, it's me. Except we both knew it was definitely them. By lunch, the news had spread through whispers and Slack messages. Ethan found me in the break room, his face a mask of forced casualness. Heard you're leaving, he said, pouring coffee with studied indifference. Probably for the best. This place requires a certain adaptability. I smiled, pleasant as poison. You're absolutely right. Adaptation is everything. He had no idea that James had already updated his LinkedIn profile to open to opportunities, that Maya had a recruiter call scheduled for Thursday, that David from engineering had spent the weekend documenting all his proprietary tools, making sure the intellectual property was clearly his own work, developed on his own time. Tuesday, James submitted his resignation. Wednesday, Maya followed. By Thursday, when David walked into HR, Patricia's confusion had transformed into panic. 4 senior contributors gone in 1 week, all from critical positions, all with institutional knowledge that would take months to replace. The CEO called an emergency meeting Thursday afternoon. I wasn't invited, I was already being treated like a ghost. Present but not acknowledged, but James texted me updates from inside the room. He's asking if there's a competitor poaching. Ethan just suggested it might be natural turnover from people who couldn't adapt to transformation. CEO buying it. Of course he was. It was easier to believe we were deadwood than admit they'd created an environment where talent was fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Friday brought 2 more resignations, not even people I'd recruited, but colleagues who'd seen the writing on the wall. If Sarah Mitchell was leaving after 12 years, if James and Maya and David were all gone, what did that say about the company's future? Ethan, meanwhile, was spinning the narrative frantically. I heard him in the hallway telling anyone who'd listen that this was healthy pruning, that it would create space for fresh thinking, that he was already identifying game-changing replacements. But I also saw the emails Laura forwarded me, the ones where Marcus Webb was asking pointed questions about the consulting firm that had proposed such an ambitious strategy but couldn't keep its own talent, where board members were wondering why Orion should trust a partner hemorrhaging human capital. My last week was surreal. I transitioned my projects, documented processes, acted like everything was normal while the department slowly realized nothing would be. The work I'd done, the relationships I'd built, the systems I'd created, they'd assumed it would all just continue running without me, like I was a replaceable cog rather than the architect of the entire machine. Reality hit when they tried to assign my projects. The predictive model I'd built for the Henderson Group, no one else understood the algorithm. The quarterly analytics framework, I'd designed it so intuitively for my own use that others needed days to decode it. The client relationships. Turns out, CEOs who'd been calling me directly for 5 years weren't interested in being handed off to whoever was available. Wednesday of my final week, Ethan made one last attempt at something. Control dominance salvage. I need you to brief my replacement hire on the Orion account, he said, standing in my cubicle like he owned it. Full documentation, all your contacts, every detail of your original analysis. I looked up from my packing, met his eyes directly for the first time since that boardroom humiliation. I'm happy to brief whoever is taking over my current accounts, but Orion wasn't my account. Remember, you made it very clear I was just... What was it? Support the slide clicker. His jaw tightened. You know what I mean. I do, I agreed. But I can only transition work that was officially mine. Anything else would be overstepping, wouldn't it? I wouldn't want to confuse anyone about roles and responsibilities. He stood there for a moment, probably calculating whether it was worth the fight, whether he could force me to give him what he needed to save face with Orion. But we both knew he had no leverage. I was already gone, and the information he needed, the analysis that might have saved him, lived in my head and my personal files, not the company's servers. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Burning bridges in this industry." "I'm not burning anything," I interrupted, voice calm as still water. "I'm transitioning professionally, serving my notice period, ensuring continuity where possible. Exactly what's required. Nothing more, nothing less." He left without another word, but I saw him an hour later in the CEO's office, gesticulating wildly, probably trying to explain why losing me mattered now when 3 weeks ago I'd been relegated to the sidelines. Thursday afternoon, Patricia from HR stopped by with exit paperwork and a barely disguised fishing expedition. "So, where are you headed?" "We like to keep track of alumni, for networking purposes." "I'm taking some time to consider my options," I said, signing forms with practiced efficiency. "And James Maya David. Quite a coincidence, all of you leaving together." "Is it?" I asked, handing back the papers. "Seems like natural turnover to me. People seeking fresh opportunities. Isn't that what transformation is all about?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable, probably remembering Ethan using those exact words days earlier. Friday. Last day. I arrived early. Made coffee one final time in the break room I'd used for 12 years. Sat at my desk as sunrise painted Manhattan gold outside the windows. My workspace was bare except for my laptop and a single photograph my team from 2 years ago, before the transformation consultants arrived, when we'd won Industry Innovation Award for work that Ethan couldn't even understand, let alone replicate. At 5 p.m. exactly, I powered down my laptop, left my keycard on the desk, and walked out. No goodbye party, they'd stopped doing those after the third resignation. No fanfare. Just Sarah Mitchell, walking out of a building where I'd given 12 years of brilliant work, carrying nothing but a box of personal items and the knowledge that in 3 days, I'd be sitting in a corner office at Orion Dynamics, building something extraordinary with people who actually understood the difference between value and vanity. But the best part, the part that made me smile as I stepped onto the sidewalk,